or what doesn't work.
All right, everyone. I will look at it in one
wait,
second. I
wait,
just
wait.
wanted
I think you're
to
pushing the
say,
laser button. Push the arrow.
just wanted to say welcome to everyone. Thank you for coming to Civic Action. There's got a little bit of an echo, so let me mute the computer. Technical difficulties, but we've got it.
Important community for it. And it's really kind of an important process for engaging the community at all stages of the research. Lost our.
Yeah.
The batteries are down.
Okay, yeah, no problem. It's true. All right, so what did we do? We had community advisory board. And sorry for the, I might stop for a minute. Gary, do you think you
From the owl, I'm gonna take a second. To do this now. Because of the owl, and they're talking in here.
Let's try about the mic.
Okay.
You guys
About the
can hear
mic.
it? Yeah.
hear me, right?
Yeah. Just a little louder.
So we have a community coordinator from Homewood residents that we engaged for when the conversation started. After conversations. Still having trouble. Sorry, everyone. Sorry.
I have the one on the computer.
I think it's on the.
So when I viewed it, you can't hear.
Okay.
All right. I don't think it's doing, is it?
I think- Oh, wait, never mind.
It's recording.
All right, cool.
It's a delay.
So there's, and we had a series of community conversations with Homewood residents, youth and adults right here in this room in 2019. And we talked about a lot of things. I'm going to actually give you a little bit more information about that related to equitable development and gentrification and neighborhood change. And then we created this playbook, this equitable development playbook, which actually includes a lot of information from the conversations and ways other residents can influence change. And then we held many virtual citizen training academies and workshops because of the pandemic, and we hope to have a citizen training academy here in person in Homewood this fall, spring, and next summer. So our community advisory board helped us develop the goals and activities to refine the methods that we use for collecting data for the research, really helped to create that beautiful logo. Donnell's skills came in handy. Graphic skills came in handy to create the logo, but that was done with our pad. You know, we had a lot of brainstorming sessions about how we wanted the project represented. And they are very involved in planning program activities and determining how we actually tell our story. That's a picture you can see from this room where we had one of our conversation sessions. Youth and adults with intergenerational dialogue and collaboration. All right. So in our conversations, what did we do? We talked about what is civic engagement. How do you get involved? This is civic action, citizen engagement, civic engagement, all really forms of engagement that people use in their local communities to influence policies, politics. It's voting, it's signing petitions, it's holding a meeting, it's registering people to vote, it's all those things. So what is that and how were people engaged? How does that apply to neighborhood change? So equitable development is really ensuring that development benefits everybody in the community. If Pittsburgh is changing for the better, then this neighborhood should change for the better, but it also should benefit neighborhood residents. They shouldn't be displaced. They shouldn't be hurt by those changes. They should benefit from those changes. And, what is the difference between, people experience gentrification, which often does occur in neighborhoods that are changing, when people are displaced and they can't afford to live in, and afford the rent anymore, versus revitalization, which is community controlled, which is driven by the community. So this community has a comprehensive plan that was developed with residents and a series of goals. And those are the things that residents are really want to see change happen in their neighborhood. They want this, those are the things they really want to see happen in terms of housing, business development, infrastructure, roads, green space, everything. And so that we went into detail about the Homewood's comprehensive plan with the community. We had people come in, policymakers, planners, and developers come in and talk to the participants and engage in conversation about ways residents could be involved in making sure those things happen, how the goals can continue to happen, be reinforced in the community from the plan. There's an equitable development strategy for wider Pittsburgh that talks about how equity should be reinforced and developed in communities. We had a developer that came in and talked about equitable development and real estate strategies. We also had interactive activities and discussions at every single session. And we played an equitable development game where where people got into small groups and had to pick policies for creating equity and equity development, prioritize those. So that was those were our sessions. And then we created this wonderful little playbook. A little flicker ain't working. And this is the front of our playbook. Right there. And that's a picture in here, actually the back of us is where we took this picture of all of our participants in our last session. And those are our cabinet members listed that are been involved in our project. So any questions about what is? So who are you guys? So tell us, can you quickly tell us your name and maybe where you're from? Is there some food I would love to see this here today?
I'm Henry. I'm a senior majoring in biology and public and professional writing.
Did you have any questions about rep?
I was curious what like the concept behind participatory research was. So because it seems like that was like the key word in the comment.
Yes. Katie's going to explain that. Good question. Yeah.
My name's Dev. I'm a first year MSW student at Pitt. I'm also a community engagement fellow working with Carrie. So yeah, should be here. Glad to be here. And I don't have any questions yet. But.
Okay, great. Yes.
I'm JC Brown. I'm an MSW student and I'm a fellow here at the Community Engagement Center. And I guess my question would be, what, if any, challenges were into performing this particular and what were the benefits for both sides? What do you think those benefits are?
Why don't we address that when we go through the slides and each of us can also contribute? Because we're going to talk about that next. But yeah, it's definitely a lot of benefits, but there are challenges in terms of the pace and the timing. You have to be very patient. You may have a schedule, but you got to adjust that to the community where the community is. That's my first thought.
I'm in the CPR course right now. I'm saying that. So
Yeah. That's right. That's right.
I'm Kelsey. I'm also a community engagement fellow here at the CEC, and I'm a first year advanced standing MSW student. I don't have any questions.
All right, great.
Well, I'm engineering. I'm working opposite the serves, and we're co-leading this with ECA and CECs. And I like to say I work with Carrie and Fort Carrie. So, very bus. And I guess my question is really about the advisory members.
Yes.
And really just looking at the names, I'm wondering about how you went about recruitment and also representation. There's a lot of cisgender names on there. And also I'm wondering about intergenerational representation.
And I can talk about that maybe after Katie. And Donnell too,
Yeah, we're
right?
talking about
Yeah.
group commitments.
I'm Deandra. I'm a junior at Pitt, psych major, public professional certificate.
And I just want to shout out
Yes.
everyone who's watching online. We have 10 people who are streaming, so welcome to you all too. We're sorry that we can't hear your name also.
Okay, so I'm going to speak a little bit more about the community-based participatory research aspect of our project. And it seems like that's something that y'all are pretty interested in. So basically, community-based participatory research strives to do research with community members rather than on or in communities. So when you like very academic removed research is research on communities. They usually focus on data, secondary data, not usually directly involved with people like face to face. So that's research on community. Research in community, researchers can go will tend to go into the community and there's a little more face to face, but there's still typically a power difference between the researchers and the goals of the community. Whereas with community-based participatory research, it brings you into direct contact with practitioners and residents, and researchers seek to engage them as full partners in every phase of the research process. So CBPR is based off of a set of principles that include equitable partnership, capacity building to make sure that the residents are respected and valued for the expertise that they bring to the table. You know, as researchers, we're almost always going to be outsiders. And so we want to make sure that when we're creating a research project, that it's in line with what the goals of the community actually are. So it's not just researchers going in and saying, all right, today we're going to learn about health. But instead it's working with community members and saying, what do you want to learn about your community and what do you want to improve and how can we help you do that? How can we connect you with resources that will bring about the goals that you are seeking? And there have been some interesting studies about CBPR that they can, and specifically university and community partnerships, which is what we are, and how it promotes anti-oppressive research, because historically researchers have gone into communities and taken information, surveys, data from community members, and communities never hear about the results. They never reap the benefits of what came out of the research project. CBPR says, no, we're not going to do it like that. Everything that we learn is going to be told directly back to the community, and they're going to be able to take that information and create lasting change for their community. Okay, so a little bit more about on and with on communities. Researcher typically has little or no direct contact with the community and it can be done remotely, whereas research with communities utilizes, utilizes research to improve practice of the lives of people in the communities, and it works with the community to collect, analyze, and interpret data. So the community members are researchers in the process as well. So for example, with the REP project, we trained our CAB members in community-based ethics, research data, that kind of stuff, so they could have the information they need to be equitable partners in the process. And then finally, research on communities requires research skills that should be applied rigorously and ethically. Research with communities values empowerment, is sensitive to issues of race and class, and comes into the community with cultural humility. Again, as researchers, we tend to be outsiders, so we want to make sure that we're respecting all of the experiences of community members that we come in contact with. And we included these slides to give you an idea about CBPR. But also all of this information can extend beyond research and fit with community work. So you can replace research and like throw in organizing. And like with like if you're gonna do organizing on communities, it's gonna be a very top-down process of like politicians, policymakers making decisions about communities without really talking to communities. And then it just is expected to trickle down and hope for the best when it reaches the community members. Whereas organizing with community members brings you in contact with them, you hear about their experiences, you hear about their views of strengths that their community has and how the community can use those strengths to address areas of improvement that they've identified. It's not outsiders coming in and saying, hey, you guys need a new school. Like community members might think their school is great and they don't think they need that, but they might need like a new rec center or a health clinic, you know, it's up to the community to decide. So any questions about CBPR? Yes.
Is there, when you say equitable partners, is there compensation for the, okay,
Yeah, so we compensate our CAB members for every meeting that they come to, for every presentation that they help us with. Usually we have CAB members present with us. They weren't available today. And then we also compensate our participants as well. So everyone who participated in those community conversations, they received compensation for every conversation that they attended, every survey they filled out, and they got a bonus at the end if they completed everything.
And the partnership between Pitt and Home Children's Village, we also share in the resources, we, you know, equitably and the decision making. Dr. Bill, myself.
So down under the two slides. Organizing in general. It seems that the three approaches are context specific, but there are right places to do research on it.
Yes.
Because, for example, one can't really do research with a community if you don't know the community.
Yes.
You need nationwide analysis of like property or healthcare or whatnot.
Definitely.
This community needs from, like, particular cultural sensitivity.
Mhm. Yeah, it definitely is context specific as far as what the needs, like what you're trying to bring out. But just generally, you want to be mindful of the people who are helping you with the project, even if it is, you're just taking surveys nationally or, you know, whatever, you want to be respectful of people who gave up their time to help with that. So I think there's a little bit of CBPR you can take into any research project, whether it's, you know, just remote research or if you're working directly with them, community members. Cool. Any other questions?
So I guess maybe we can talk a little bit about recruitment of our CAB. So initially, Homewood Children's Village helped us recruit our community advisory board from their leadership institute, because their leadership institute identified gentrification and equitable development as a very important issue that they wanted the community to address and that they wanted to be involved in. So, and prior to community conversations, we had about 5 or 6 people, and actually Donnell, we recruited from CLI, the Leadership Institute. Then after the conversations, we did recruit additional CAB members as well from the conversations and youth, but because of the pandemic, they did not want to do virtual meetings. They were already kind of tapped out with Zoom. And we did have a few, but we kind of lost them. But we hope to engage more youth to our Citizen Training Academy. And I don't know if you want to say anything else about the recruitment of the CAB and the roles of the CAB.
Yeah, like she said, we recruited from the Leadership Institute. If you want to check into a little bit background on that, it was a program that Homewood Children's Village implemented in Homewood. Its goal was pretty similar to REP, basically to get community members active in the community and knowledgeable of the issues and grant them the tools and the ability to actually speak the same language as developers and people who are working, you know, with the city. And a lot of what they did was, you know, talk about different issues, and they just gauged interest in whatever issues. So we did a lot of environmental issues, like Homewood has a lot of issues with lead pipes, lead paint, lead in the soil. You know, a lot of different issues, housing, taxes, and communication, obviously. And we just looked at that pool of people who were active and said, these are people who are interested in being in our cap. Come. You really don't have like a leadership structure per se. Everyone's pretty much equal, right?
Yes, everyone's an equal member of that, yeah.
We can probably go into recruitment if you don't know.
Well, we can talk a little bit about our community engagement techniques and
That's right.
principles now.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
So these are gonna be the two main like principles or techniques that we're gonna focus on as far as content for this presentation.
So let's talk about inclusion. So inclusion. So getting members of the community to the table, granting access to opportunities. A lot of these opportunities to meet with city planners or policymakers really aren't accessible to people who work a 9-to-5 job. A lot of these meetings can happen at 1 o'clock. And part of what we want to do is create a little group of people that someone could go, you could disseminate that information to your group and affect community change that way. So that grant them a chance to make positive community change and get rid of some of those barriers. It's, something that we can do to improve the quality of life for everybody in this neighborhood.
Inclusion also is about diversity and representation of people who live in this neighborhood. We try to recruit for the community conversations, particularly to ensure that people were represented in different parts of the community, in different types of backgrounds and lifestyles, everything. Young teens from 13 to 17 is our range for young people. And then we did try to get different age groups involved, and I felt pretty good about.
Yeah, we had some young adults.
Yes, young adults as
Some
well.
older senior citizen people. We had a lot of teenagers.
A good range of people that were heavily involved in the neighborhood and then that never were involved. And especially the young people had never been exposed to these kinds of issues in a way where they were actually seen as change makers.
So let's talk about some of the ways that we recruited people for our project. Obviously, our partner organization, our neighborhood organization, which was really instrumental. They have a large pool of active youth that they work with. They have a large network of people that they know in this neighborhood that are active in the community. So they were instrumental. We also canvassed a lot of youth organizations in this neighborhood, churches, at the YMCA, the library. We reached out to pretty much anyone we could reach out to. We went to schools, so we got with teachers and school counselors to talk about the program, the perspective you would be interested in the program. We spent a lot of time attending community meetings, not necessarily just presenting our topic, but just being there so that we could be seen as a presence and, someone that's just in the community, not looking to just get data, get out. We asked interested participants to get their friends involved, so I think it's called snowballing, right? And also we had regular hours here. I was here, and a couple other people on the project would be here a couple days a week. Regular hours. If you had any questions with the project, you could stop by and we would be here.
So these aren't only things that we did, but these are also things that we recommend for organizations trying to work directly with communities. So the next community engagement technique and principle that we wanted to share about is connection, which we're defining as ensuring that once everyone is at the same table, there can be effective dialogue where everyone's voices is heard. So inclusion is about getting everyone to the table, and then connection is about making sure that the dialogue that happens once you're there benefits everyone, everyone's heard. So the tips that we recommend for achieving this connection is first, you want to ensure proper group cohesion and formation. This is an important step in any group development, but you want to make sure that the group comes together and has understanding of each other's identities, what's important to the group, just, those classic icebreaker things that you do that are a little bit awkward, but they do go a long way in connecting people together. The second tip is offer capacity building, so all participants have equal access to necessary information, because it can be very isolating if you're in part of a conversation and you don't even understand some of the like acronyms that people are using. And in the nonprofit world, there are a lot of acronyms and it can be hard to keep up with them. But in addition, like just whatever terms that you're using, you want to make sure everyone's on the same page. And so that's what we did, for example, with our CAB, was teaching them about community-based participatory research, ethics, research strategies, those kind of things, so that there wouldn't be a power difference, or to try to lessen the power difference between researchers and community members. And the third and fourth kind of go hand in hand, but you want to identify common interests among the group and identify common values among the group. And these are things that can come about naturally as we're having these conversations. But it can help bring people together if you hear someone else say, well, access to healthcare is really important to me. You know, like 4 other people will chime in and say, yeah, that's really important to me too. And it can just get the conversation going and develop that connection when you know the people in this room value the same things as me, or maybe I want to introduce them to new values and kind of expand what the group focuses on. Any questions about those two, the inclusion or the connection?
I have a quick question about the community conversations. Were they more like structured, like focus group interviews, or was it actually just like a open conversation about the issues out?
I would say that we left it open, but we had a lot of structure. So we would have, you know, sections of the conversations that would be very structured, and then we would also have sections where we would allow people to have open dialogue and talk about how they feel to. You can get like people who normally wouldn't have, you know, opinion they would like to share those opinions with people.
We did a lot of interactive stuff. So we had this one activity where it was about housing. We were talking about housing, affordable housing. We had two policy options that people had to actually argue for, and we had them stand their ground, right? So we had to, this side for this policy option, and this side for this policy option, and they had to argue. They had to get people to come to their side. So it was really quite interesting because the youth ended up on one policy option for the youth, right?
It was public housing.
Yes.
And
It was home ownership,
and home
affordable
ownership.
home ownership.
And a lot of the youth felt really strongly about having public housing. A lot of the older people obviously felt really strongly about owning homes. And there was a lot of debate, and honestly, like people switch sides, you know, people make convincing arguments.
So yeah, I mean, things like that. So it was like small group discussions and then dialogue, but also these interactive exercises. A lot of them were with both youth and adults, and sometimes we split the adults separately from the youth, depending on kind of what we were talking.
We would have like a group exercise, and then we would have someone go out and represent the people of
Yes.
the group and have to argue for those as well. So
And our speakers would stay, it's, you know, when we have the speakers, they would stay and then participate in those activities with the participants.
Any other questions? So after you've had this, after you've gotten a good group of people together, and you've had this awesome dialogue, then what? So these are some tips, community organizing tips for orienting the dialogue towards action, because especially if you're coming in with a community organization or a researcher, you want to make sure that the promises you're making are not empty. You want to make sure that change can come forth from it, and there can be a plan that leads to change. So first is, as a group, create goals based off of the identified interests and values. And these can all be casually in conversation. It doesn't have to be a really structured thing. These could just be questions that you pose. Okay, now that we all know we like, or we're really interested in healthcare, what should we do about it for this community? So after you've created your goals, you want to identify potential partners or opponents that the group would like to influence to achieve said goals. So this could be someone in the city council who represents you that you think would support you, and you want to get them on board with what you're trying to achieve. Or it might be someone who you think would oppose what you're trying to do, and you want to try to be aware of what they might respond with. That way you can have a plan of action. It's good to know both who's going to support you and who would oppose you. And then third, identify resources that are currently available to members. There's a lot of power when we gather a group together. And oftentimes, especially when we've learned through conversations with our CAB, is someone will say, oh, well, I know the chief of staff for our local representative. I can talk to him and see if he can help us, or like, or I'm good friends with the person who runs the library. Let me see if they can help us, that kind of thing. So you want to see what's already present in the room and use that to achieve the goals that you've created. Anything else to add to that? I'm going to pass off the mic soon. Okay, and then finally, this is just a quote from one of our participants from our community conversations that kind of summarizes what we just talked about. They said, maybe we can become a group. I mean, there's a lot of knowledge in this room. We have to have a common focus, though. It was really neat to see towards the end of the community conversations, this little group of participants got really passionate about a certain topic, and they formed a small group that continued to meet after the conversations pre-COVID. But that was possible because they were brought into the situation together, and the connection was built up over the weeks where they felt comfortable working together, and they identified what they were passionate about and how they were going to work to achieve it. Okay, I'm done talking. Any other questions before we move on to our activity? Take it away, Andre.
So the activity is a mock dialogue, and a common theme that you guys have heard throughout the entire presentation is the emphasis that Rep places on conversation and dialogue, and why that's important. So for a mock dialogue, first of all, what is a mock dialogue? It's an interactive discussion that seeks to find common interests among participants and residents, which you guys have heard throughout the entire presentation. And it's a conversation used to build capacity and just to identify what equity means to the individual. So then you can find common interest among the group and then start conversations from there, and then that can create action. And why is that important? So it's important because it engages diverse community participants in group dialogues. And it also increases civic engagement, which is the overarching goal of REP, just to increase civic engagement and empower the community residents to become change agents in their community and make sure that change is sustainable. And we also place an emphasis on intergenerational dialogue. So again, throughout the presentation, you guys have heard that we like to engage youth, maybe someone that's 14, and pair someone that's also 76 together, because they offer varying ideas, and that's really important just to sustain dialogue. And like Darnell mentioned earlier, with housing policy versus home ownership, just having those two, like the dichotomy of those ideas is really important. And oftentimes with community dialogue, you can hear a lot of social work buzzwords like equity and capacity, and what does that truly mean and why it's important? So this is a picture that I think clearly summarizes the idea of what we define as equity, just equal opportunity for everyone. So everyone, including stakeholders, community members, anyone in the community has equal access to all resources and information. So how do you start a mock dialogue? It can be awkward to kind of get the conversation started, but these are 5 examples of questions that we could use to inform how to begin the dialogue and how to sustain the dialogue. So one of the questions that you could ask is, what comes to mind when you hear the words community building? And then you can get the information from the residents and participants, and then the conversation snowballs from there. A couple other questions could be, what are the most difficult challenges you face in your neighborhood? What community initiatives have or have not worked in the past? It's important to gather history on the communities that you're working with, and that's a really good question to kind of have that inform future interventions. How can we empower more community members to become involved? And lastly, are there any local resources available that would help facilitate community development? And again, these are just a summation of a few examples of what we could use to kind of facilitate that community dialogue. And for example, we're going to show you a bit of how that works. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Omer.
All right, so one of the things that we really felt important that came out of REP was community members felt empowered to address issues with policymakers, right, that were important to the community. So they have a voice, they're at the table, they're using their community plans, they've defined kind of what community means to them, and their role and their voice, right? So has anybody heard of the Pittsburgh office of, it's the City of Pittsburgh office called Department of Mobility and Infrastructure? Have you seen those scooters around? Okay, so they're responsible for those scooters. So they had a series of meetings they set up, the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, DOMI, so with communities around Pittsburgh, with neighborhoods around Pittsburgh, and contacted REP through Shanna, Dr. Gilliam, at Homewood Children's Village to set up a meeting with some of the residents in the neighborhood. And she set up a meeting with DOMI, with the representative, and the community members were very vocal about in that meeting about scooters. So and so I don't know, and this was prior to when they actually put them out.
Yeah.
And Donnell, do you want to say a little bit more about that meeting with DOMI?
Yeah, absolutely. Basically, they came in really not knowing that there's already a neighborhood plan, and a lot of the transportation goals that they had listed as options for people to select were already said, like, hey, these were the things that our neighborhood plan says that we want. So but they already were looking to start the research process all over again. They really had not thought about a lot of the implications of putting transportation hubs in different blocks in Homewood. So some of the options that they had asked, okay, where do you want this transportation hub? They really had thought about who they would need to talk to facilitate that happening. Like they wanted to put one on Homewood in Frankstown, not really thinking about there's a lot of, people there, a lot of different things that we shop zone 5 about, where we can put this transportation hub.
So in other words, they hadn't read the plan. They really didn't understand the goals of the plan for like the things the community wanted related to infrastructure. And they said, they really focused the conversation on, well, we're gonna have these scooters, where do you want them? And so the community was like, oh, no, back up. Read the plan. We're not sure, but they had already, here's the problem. So community engaged work, you go to the community, you see what their goals are, you apply for funding to help meet those goals. Well, they got a grant for the scooters before they asked anybody if they wanted scooters. So kind of backwards. And so we want to illustrate the community, a mock dialogue between the community members that attended that meeting after that meeting. So what did they talk about? What did community building mean to them in that? What challenges do they think they faced dealing with DOMI in this? What things, what other resources, can they bring to bear, people to bring to bear to influence that issue? So Donnell, Andre, and Katie are going to be the community members having a conversation. And Dot.
So I'm really mad about these scooters. They're dangerous. I'm seeing teenagers using them. Not supposed to be using them. I can't believe that they just put them in here. They didn't really listen to us. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I agree. Sometimes whenever I come home, they're in my driving spot, or they're all over the streets, and it's like a nuisance to traffic and parking, and it just makes everything really difficult.
These scooters are supposed to be only for people who are over 18. How are the kids getting access to use these scooters? I didn't really contact about this. I actually know someone at Zone 5. Maybe I can contact someone down there and see if we can do anything about where these scooters are ending up.
Yeah, so we're worried about, kids underage using them and the scooters being left in places where they're not supposed to. I've seen them on the highway. Like, how did they get, how have they been left on the highway? They shouldn't even be using them. So it seems like what we want to work on is making sure that only people over 18 are using them and seeing if there's any way to better enforce where they're left. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah, I agree. I just think having oversight over the entire scooter fiasco would be most important to us.
Do you know anyone who you think could help us?
I think that at my job, actually, I think someone knows someone that works for Domi. I think I can maybe try to like get that partnership just together to see if they can also like come in and help us figure this out.
Let's talk about prospective meeting dates. What's your schedule looking like for next week?
I work during the day, but I can meet after 7.
I have a pretty similar schedule. Anything after 6 is good for me.
I work till 5, so anything after 5.
So do we want to, you guys use Zoom? Okay, let's Zoom at 7 o'clock on Wednesday.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay.
Great, perfect.
And we'll come back after talking to our people and see what we found out.
So what a challenge did they try to address? Like, what was the challenge that they were? Yes.
The lack of oversight of the implementation. These two, Domi and the city in general, fail to provide any kind of oversight over how schools should be disseminated, whether or not there would be any parking for them to allow people to go to locations. Oh, yeah, and also we're not communicating clearly after the fact.
Right. So not only did they not want the scooters, but they got them anyway, and now they have a problem. Right? So what else? What were some of the local resources or resources they were trying to tap into to help solve the problem or address the issue? In the dialogue? Yeah.
Zone 5.
Yes.
So it's a local police department.
Yeah, so the Zone 5 Police Department, that's the safety, right? That's public safety, right? Okay.
But I heard them talk about the actual the company and like seeing if anyone knew anyone at the company, and it sounded like someone did.
Yes, exactly. So another person may have a relationship that could inside Domi that could influence, right? That's really important. So what do you think they could do to empower more community members to be involved? They didn't talk about that, but they're going to meet. So do you have any advice for them? For when they meet that stuff?
Maybe try and talk to, I'm sure, the parents of all these kids using these scooters, because invariably either the parents are complaining to them or the parents have more specific complaints. Like, for example, the parents might know exactly where these kids can be scooters.
Awesome. Yes. So they want to get, so inclusion, thinking about that inclusion, right? And the connection they can make. Parents, you know, kids might be using or know about these scooters, or it could be, you know, and their, how they value safety for their kid, right? That's really important. Other suggestions? And I think once they get people on board and they start addressing the scooter issue, they can also advocate for Domi, for the other infrastructure goals that are. We start to have this dialogue among more community members. And then also being, I would say another thing, get involved with community organizations who are involved in creating the plan too. All those people who could back up this group's interest in solving this issue. So now, so any questions? So do you guys want to practice a dialogue yourselves? We can have you do a mock dialogue on this group. You can pick an issue.
I have a question, and also I'd be down to practice the mock dialogue, but I have a question about like, how do you, when you're in a situation that's maybe not a formal situation, but you've been taught these skills through the rec project or another project, like, how do you go about initiating a conversation like that Or like, yeah, like is there like organically how this stuff like this happens?
So, I mean, so, like, you're talking about among the people who are participating in our group or just in general, like, if they,
Yeah, let's say I participated in your group and I'm at a community meeting that's not related to rep, but you're talking about the scooters and you're thinking in your head like, oh, I can do like, I have the skills from this other thing to like, what, how do you then start a conversation or like, have you seen examples of that or? you
yeah,
know,
I mean,
something like that?
you literally just, if someone says, hey, I agree with you, or, you know, backs you up in any kind of way, you can say, hey, do you have any time? You know, this week, I want to do this, this, and this, and I know you know this person, maybe you could pull them in. I'm gonna get this, you know, these papers together and, maybe we can get a couple signatures on this. You know, just kind of throw some actions out there, and if they're interested and they have time, people will do it. It's not, you know, super crazy.
Right, so yeah, so I mean, we really reinforced all those organizing strategies, like if you care about an issue, find out somebody else that does and engage with them. And so on our, we can send everyone our playbook. In the playbook are all the community engagement and organizing strategies that we went through in the conversations. And that actually people use that playbook. They went through our conversations in the workshops that we have with the community. They actually use it to, they're like, okay, I really have to do something. I'm gonna, you know, do some of these things that we actually practiced and used and rep. And I'm going to organize, you know, so they got organized after that meeting. And even in our CAB meetings themselves, we had conversations about these scooters and about other things, about a lot of other issues that the community was concerned about. And that the CAB members were concerned about, and, you know, walk them through any assistance we could provide, but they were pretty much like, we're gonna do something about,
Yeah.
you know,
And if they're,
access to vaccines, access to COVID tests during COVID. I mean, all those things were things we talked about, and they were concerned about, and that they started to actually connect with people about.
yeah, and if they're at these meetings, your appreciations require, you know, if they have time or availability, and they're interested, they'll do it.
So, okay, who would like to practice, pick an issue and practice a dialogue?
Actually.
Go ahead.
Everybody lives in Pittsburgh, right?
You could pick the issue.
Yeah, and
Go ahead.
if we can go around the room, what neighborhoods do you live in? And maybe even say one issue from that neighborhood that you think is a problem.
Rather than North Oakland. Food availability.
Okay.
Okay, so you mean like restaurants or grocery stores? Grocery stores, okay.
I live in Friendship and my biggest, I think, issue with that neighborhood is the resource hoarding. It seems like we're like painting streets with murals on the ground and there's like other neighborhoods in Pittsburgh that desperately need resources reallocated to them. So it's like my biggest issue is that we're like beautifying some neighborhoods in Pittsburgh while other neighborhoods could desperately use resources like a grocery store or food.
Okay.
I'm in Central Oakland. Very close to South Oakland. There's trash everywhere. All the different ones. I'm not remembering. I'm also in Friendship. And I'm not feeling that answer. But relatable. Also, kind of going off of Stacy's trash. I don't know how often, like, I don't know if there's different trash companies, but they come at like 4 in the morning right near my apartment. And I feel like there's just always still trash, even though they'll come in multiple times a week. Like, I don't know.
Sure.
So I live in Wilkinsburg, but kind of like Wilkinsburg and the beginning of Forest Hills. But yeah, I would say like light and just kind of like open spaces that are like I like to go to the parks, but I have to go to like work or send me like, you know, to walk and walk my dog. Like open spaces.
Okay.
I'm on the Pitt campus, I'm not too sure where in Oakland. And I'm not from Pittsburgh, I'm from Philly, so I'm not too sure about the issues here, but hearing about trash, that's a big problem in Philly as well. So based on everybody's comments, what was the thing that people brought up the most? If you were in a group, say, and you were in one neighborhood, and people were bringing up all these different issues, how would you choose which to have that conversation about?
They're doing the same, but it's
Yeah.
more about resources.
Mhm.
I think it's very important with the lack of grocery stores. I think that kind of trumps trash.
Yeah, so you have to have a dialogue, right, about, you know, and it doesn't mean you don't address all those issues. It means what are the things that were the most important to people? And where's the common interest and common values, right, among community. So it sounds like, you know, what the community could visibly and, you know, the trash, right, and then also resources, right? So I think that could be a definite starting point for dialogue.
Okay.
You guys, do you have
I
any?
can create a scenario actually.
Go ahead.
Let's say you all live in a cluster of like 3 different neighborhoods that are all kind of together. So North Oakland, Central Oakland, and then a part of town that is like got a little bit more like trash. North Oakland has the most resources and it's super beautiful. Central Oakland is dirty, and then you know the lower part of Oakland is vacant and white, and there's no grocery store. How would you pool your resources and community knowledge to like find people to reach out to, talk about reallocating resources to clean up trash and deal with blight?
That's a
Well, I mean, for that, we're talking about 3 different environments. It seems less like community organization and more like practical policy based and forming, like essentially the people in central and the city, like specified by Pittsburgh, writing a draft of their problems or the system behind why this problem exists and the impacts of all this problem and going to the people's resources and like saying, this is this problem, you don't have it, we do, it's causing these effects. And then because you want to convince them that can do actions that benefit you, you probably have to argue why the particular harms of this trash problem are downstream impacting them as well.
Yes.
Or impacting something that they care about that doesn't reflect. Perhaps they don't either treat them like as if they are self-centered, which is reasonable, or that, I don't know, they have some humanistic concern about the environment or kind of feel that.
So that is community organizing. So you're right, you got it. Yeah, that would definitely be a way to approach it, is come up with your plan. And what you're basically saying is trying to find common interest between you and your group and policymakers, whether that's, hey, re-elections are coming up and like I have a block of 500 voters and, you know, we'll use our voting power, but just like, here's what is important to our community. That is like a viable way to influence policymakers, you know, in some way.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to know your communities, and because there's different styles of organizing, and knowing which style to take on. So this has been an issue forever. And we've talked with Chris, policymakers, and we take on a more like what style of organizing. Do we want to like protest? Do we want to, you know, have these forums or, you know, not attack these policymakers, and or we want to, or we haven't really done it or not really talked to policymakers, so we want to actually sit down and have a conversation and be more, like, you know, working towards like a partnership with them. Yeah, so it definitely is also contextualized, like it's because it's been an issue for forever, and they don't care if we brought it up, you know, multiple times in this way of, hey, we need this to do this for us, like, hey, no, we need this to do this for us. And they like more loud in our actions.
So, yeah, that identifying like whether or not they've been an opponent or supporter in the past, looking at the history, engaging, and then engaging in dialogue with the community about what you just talked about, how, what is the history? What has worked, who has listened, who hasn't, how then do we engage, what kind of organizing approach do we use depending on how that policymaker or person has engaged with the community in the past.
So I think that that's like a great place to stop. We're at 1 p.m. And so let's just thank our guests. This was really, really great. And if you want to hang around for an hour, there is an awesome session happening at 2 p.m. Around environmental justice focused on water. So you're welcome to hang out here, use the internet, use the printer. And there is Civic Action Week cake outside. So. Oh, it's in the kitchen. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We really appreciate everyone's time.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you. I'm gonna get your pictures. It was too much.
No, I think having that conversation was